There has been much information about IQ, intellect, and EQ, emotional intelligence. But what about the intelligence coming from your experience? Don't we learn by experience? Soren Kaplan delves into experiential intelligence and how to leverage it within yourself and within your team. Let's listen to him. Welcome to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katrina Berus, and today we have Soren Kaplan. Soren, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So you're the expert on experiential intelligence. Please tell us how you got interested in that and define it.
I have worked with thousands of leaders around the world. I ran the strategy group at Hewlett-Packard in Silicon Valley. I've done a few startups. And what I've realized is that in today's disruptive world, we oftentimes assume IQ, how intellectually intelligent you are, is important, and it is. And your emotional intelligence helps you navigate the world and understand customer needs and your team and yourself. But we really haven't had a way to talk about and understand how our life's experiences in personal life and business life really impact us in ways that create and build real intelligence that we can leverage to achieve our business goals and personal goals.
How wonderful, because really it misses the experiential intelligence. So I'm glad you've really researched it. But tell us how the XQ, as you call it, complements the IQ, the intellect, and the EQ, the emotional intelligence.
As we're living life and growing up, we have experiences, and we've had words to talk about this to a certain extent, like street smarts, or the popularized term, the 10,000 hour rule that Malcolm Gladwell popularized, to help us understand how do these things that occur in our lives instill certain ways of thinking and certain abilities, because we just are navigating the world and developing abilities based on our life circumstances. And so your XQ, or your experiential intelligence, is really the combination of your mindsets, how you think, and the abilities and your know-how, what you know how to do. And that comes from experience. Experiential learning is something that we oftentimes talk about the importance of in leadership development or team building. And we have experiences and want to give people experiences because it changes us, instills certain ways of thinking. And experiential intelligence is really making explicit what that is for us, that has given us strengths, and what that can be and what exists in our teams that might be flying under the radar.
So Soren, give us an example of, let's say, the workshops that you've given and then how it has changed their way of thinking and as a person.
So I'll give you a very simple example that I think maybe we can all relate to, and then I'll tie it back into business really quick. So think about, how did you learn how to ride a bike if you know how to ride a bike? It probably wasn't by reading a manual and using your left brain. You had to experience it. And when you ride a bike, you learn how to move the steering wheel, and you learn how to brake. Those are your base, kind of know how your skills you develop. Well, you also end up developing abilities if you do it long enough, which is about navigating bumps or riding defensively in traffic or anticipating potholes in the road. Those are higher order abilities. And then you can also develop mindsets around riding a bike. You can look at it as transportation, but you can also think about it as socializing with friends and going out on group rides, or adventure and exploring neighborhoods that you might not have gone into. Now, at the same time, let's say you've fallen over a little bit. Let's say you've fallen over and you've gotten hurt. Let's say you've fallen over and you've been embarrassed in front of your friends as you're growing up. You can develop mindsets that might be limiting you. Like, hey, this bike is a way to get hurt, or this bike is an opportunity to be embarrassed. I need to avoid that. So you can have self-limiting mindsets, or you can have expanding mindsets around how you want to use this bike and this experience you've had. So all of that is really, instilled in us, sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously. Now, the opportunity in business is to understand that for yourself, what's getting in your way, And then also what you can leverage that might be things you've developed that are unconventional, not part of your resume. And that applies to your team as well. And I can give you a whole host of examples of how to, look at hiring people who might not have the exact job description because they have those life experiences and skill sets, or how you pull that out of your team and leverage your team's experiential intelligence. Or you look at scaling best practices based on people's experiences and not necessarily their resumes. There's a lot of applications in business and in leadership and in teams where this can apply.
Just give us some examples.
I was talking to a woman named Santi Ramesh. Santi is a client of mine. She was former head of international marketing at Hershey, the chocolate company. And I was talking to her about what allowed her to be so successful. And she's just named as one of the top chief marketing officers in the world. And she said, and we were kind of talking about, well, it's not about necessarily the work experience she's had. How has she applied some of her life experience to what she's done? And she said, oh, that's easy. I learned how to play violin early on, and I played in an orchestra. And I said, well, how did that help you be one of the top CMOs in the world? And she said it was because she had to have intense focus and be really good at something. And as she was playing with other people, she had to learn when to step up and lead and when to pull back and let the rest of her orchestra kind of take the lead. And that creativity involved with understanding how to be focused, yet let go, and how to compose music allowed her to work with her own international teams and know when to step up and really lead and take charge and direct versus pull back and let others kind of do their own thing. So it was an insightful conversation I had with Santi, and she had some real awareness about her abilities and how she was thinking about leadership. Now, here's another simple example. I also run a software company, and a young woman came to me and said, hey, I'd love to work for you. She wanted an internship building out some best practices for kind of business strategy and business process around strategy. And I said, well, what's your work experience? And she said that she didn't have any, and that she was 22 years old and she hadn't graduated college yet. And I said, well, what have you done? And she said, well, I moved from the US to Israel when I was in middle school, and I'd had to just kind of dive into public school there and learn Hebrew and get along. And then I said, well, what else did you do after you graduated your high school? And she said, well, I joined the military and I was in there for a year. It's compulsory. And then I decided to stay another year, and I led a battalion of about 20 people. So I asked her how she learned how to do that. And she said she had to figure it out, that no one really taught her, but she had to figure it out. And then I said, well, what did you do after that? And she said, well, I took 6 months off and I just got back from traveling alone in India.
Wow.
And so all of those life experiences, I said, well, okay, it sounds like you are a real go-getter. You figure things out, you just make it happen, and you're adept at working across cultures and probably living with a lot of uncertainty. And what she has proven very quickly is that she can do those things with teams. So she's leading a team of people who, one person's in Africa, one person's in the US, one person's in Europe. And she's become a real all-star by leveraging things that didn't come from a resume, things that aren't, part of the job description that we had for this, product manager. And so it's a wonderful example of what I call hiring outside the box, being open to other, skill sets, or being open to understanding what someone brings, their strengths, their assets, without that kind of formal work experience. So that's just another example.
Wonderful example. Tell us a little bit more about the experiential intelligence in leading teams and organizations.
So when you think about how you leverage experiential intelligence, it's about understanding your own personal story. And so for yourself, it's thinking through and understanding what are the most poignant experiences I had in my life, and what assets did they give to me? And so that's a very personal thing at an individual level. But teams are just a collection of individuals. So we all have our stories. Now, I'll just bring this to life with my own a little bit unusual example. I grew up with a mother who had a mental illness. She got it when I was 3 years old. My father was rarely around, working multiple jobs. And by the time I was 15 years old, we had moved 16 times. So I
Wow.
learned to live with a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty and make decisions without a lot of data. And given I had definitely some struggles as a child and into my teenage years, and at the same time, those same struggles gave me some unique gifts that I've used to run startups and work with deciphering organizational cultures and read body language and be successful in a number of ways. So the same things that kind of were challenges also gave me strengths. Now, we all have those kinds of things if we are open and to ourselves and also willing to share with other people. So teams, when you look at the opportunity there, another quick example, Fortune 1000 company I worked with, a team coming together for the first time after COVID, about 100 people in a department was composed of multiple teams. What we had people do is we basically gave them pre-work. It was super simple. It said, think about the top 3 experiences in your life that shaped you in some meaningful way, and what strengths do they deliver to you? And so we had people come in the room ready to share their experiences. We paired them up. They shared. And then we took those pair teams and put them into groups of 6 people, so 3 pairs. They shared some of their conclusions about the strengths that existed. And what they realized is that a lot of people had, there were some commonalities. And so each of those groups shared what the, strengths and assets were that their group of 6 had to contribute to the larger department. And we created a list and an inventory of all the assets that existed that could be used to leverage for innovation, for executing on their business strategy over the next year. And those are resident strengths that exist because of people's experience, not because necessarily they went to school and learned a specific tool or technique. And so that's really, every team has an opportunity just to say, what are all the inherent strengths we're bringing from our lives? And how do we understand those in a little bit more of a structured way than we are today?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure it gives them more meaning in what they do because they can relate it to what they've lived too. It's like a lot of adult learning. You leverage your experience and then you add the theory to it. So it's developing on what you've experienced. It gives you more meaning.
It does. And the other thing that happens if you are willing to have a team have those types of conversations, which can require a little bit of vulnerability, that people feel heard. They feel seen in a way that it's their life they're talking about, their most poignant experiences. And when their team members understand them better and see them and hear them and understand what led to them being there and the strengths they believe they can contribute, then there's just this greater empathy that happens and a connection that happens that allows for, as you move forward as a team, for people to tap into other people's strengths and work together as a team in a way that, just if you keep things at a surface level, might be harder to do.
So what would you advise leaders to leverage this experiential intelligence? What could you advise them to do to tap into this?
Yeah, I think the first thing is you look at who you want to bring on your team. For example, you want to hire outside the box. You want to not necessarily be constrained by rigid job descriptions and prior experience, that there's a lot of talent out there that can help you take things to the next level if you aren't constrained by how you think about people's experiences and skills and assets. The other is just you want to leverage the team's experiential intelligence by doing similar things as I talked about. And that can apply to just bringing your team together to talk about the assets you have and how you want to execute on your strategies, all the way into performance evaluations and trying to help people understand kind of what they are bringing to the party and how to leverage that, and looking at the experiences within the team that have happened in the last year, for example, and deciphering those in terms of what the skills were and assets and mindsets that allowed you to succeed in those high point experiences. The other one I'd say is, as a leader yourself, start getting in touch with the experiences that shaped you. If you want to go deep with a coach, or you want to just go deep with yourself or your partner or someone you trust, being able to understand your experiences and reflect on the ones, I call them visceral memories, the ones that conjure up some kind of emotion for you. Usually those have some influence on you today, positively or negatively. and being conscious of what that influence might be. And the structure of experiential intelligence is your mindsets, how you think. Are those experiences, constraining how you think, creating some self-limiting beliefs? Are they helping you in some positive way because they're a very positive asset that you should be leveraging more of? And then, of course, your, whatever abilities and know-how and skills that you've developed from those experiences that you can leverage more of. It's experiential intelligence is really a positive psychology focused, strengths-based, assets-based tool. So while you might want to overcome some of your limitations, it's really about leveraging strengths of yourself and of your team.
But what happens if somebody has a very negative mindset when they go through this process? How do you sort of shift their mindset?
It can be difficult, but at the same time, if that individual is working with someone who has the ability, whether it's a coach or if you're a leader and you can help your team keep a strengths-based focus and reflect on what their own experiences are with that individual. Not every individual is all negative or has all weaknesses. And so the question would be, how do you help an individual see what those experiences were that happened to them in their lives and decipher what they have done to compensate for whatever happened or to address whatever happened in a way that led them to, whether it's coping mechanisms or whether it's, things that 10,000 hour rule, things that they did that has allowed them to get to where they are from a success standpoint. And so there's, even when you get into some of the bigger traumas, there's some research that talks about post-traumatic growth, that you can go through big traumas, yet come out the other side thinking differently in a way that helps you or that reframes your purpose. And so being able to lead with vulnerability in your own stories. I shared some of mine just a moment ago so that you can create an environment where others feel more comfortable going a little bit deeper for themselves. And that's one way in which to approach it.
Right. And I coach brilliant but difficult leaders, and difficult meaning that they're less developed in their interpersonal skill set. So a lot of them have, how do you say, if you can combine people by what they do and how they are, okay? Being versus doing, they're all on the doing. So it's a lot of experience and achievement, but they don't, if they don't achieve, they don't feel they fulfill anything. So how would you address a profile like that, which has a mindset that is only achieving?
Yeah, well, I think the challenge with that one is about where that came from and helping to understand the source of that and helping that individual understand what is that enabling and what has that led to in terms of success and validating that in terms of how they might define success and what might it be limiting that they want in their personal and work lives. And so my example is, leading with vulnerability as a coach myself. I might share my own story around, kind of the elements that I shared around my mother, with her mental illness and my father not really giving me attention and time and being focused on his spiritual pursuits and rarely around. I also became a doer and I looked to the external for achievement. And so I grew up in a very difficult situation and I went to some of the top schools and tried to, was a leader of a strategy group in Silicon Valley before I was age 30 because I was compensating for something, but I was making up for something that I didn't have early on and I wasn't aware of it. But I also, because I was able to achieve certain measure of success, I also lost out on other things in terms of certain, types of quality of relationship, balance. And so by, telling my own story and making those connections, helping that individual who's such a doer, try to understand what the source is of their drive, and then also what they might be, their vision for what they want in the future and what might be missing at the end of the day as they write their own obituary, so to speak, that they're not getting because they're not pausing. They're not looking inside in a way that might allow them to kind of do and achieve other things. And so that's generally how I approach it with some of those kind of type A doer achiever folks.
What helped you to make that transformation?
I think recognizing what I just said, that I had some struggles in my own personal life. And even though on the outside I looked pretty successful, on the inside I didn't feel that way. And some of my personal relationships and just how I felt inside, I guess you could say that sort of rock bottom feeling created the foundation for looking at myself differently and recognizing I needed to do some things differently. But because I also have worked with so many leaders, I also saw a common thread and a sight line between some of the positive leadership attributes as well as the struggles that I had seen in leaders. And I started recognizing them in myself. And so then I was able to make connections to what I think I could contribute to work on myself and also contribute to the world, which has become experiential intelligence as I've been talking about it.
Yes. Well, thanks for sharing. And talk about your book. It's coming out, right? Where can we get hold of it? It's Experiential Intelligence. And maybe just tell us a little more about your book.
Yeah, so it's Experiential Intelligence, Harness the Power of Experience for Personal and Business Breakthroughs. And it is currently available globally. It's been profiled in Harvard Business Review, Psychology Today, Inc. Magazine, Forbes, and others. And I'm pleased to kind of share that it's getting some good reception. If you go to my website, sorenkaplan.com, you can get the first chapter. You just download it. It gives a pretty good synopsis of what it's all about as well.
Well, thank you very, very much. I look very forward to reading it. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you for listening to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. You can subscribe to all future podcasts at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. Join us each Wednesday to learn more about the latest trends in leadership techniques and bring your coaching to the next level. To learn more about Dr. Burris's CEO Mastermind, use the contact form at excellentexecutivecoaching.com.